I'm Evan, I work at Free Lives, and I guess I give people a lot of feedback, and it's something that I have to be good at because destructive feedback is like worse than no feedback. Like it's actually a thing you can do wrong. It's not just a thing that any feedback is good.
I'm Jonathan. I'm an artist programmer at Free Lives. I've spent a lot of time in the art community, and especially an art community that likes giving feedback to each other. And I've seen a lot of people give feedback with a whole bunch of different responses. And I've given feedback myself with also a lot of different responses. So I've been learning a lot about how to change the way that I do it. I don't think I'm fantastic at it yet, but I think we're always learning.
You said to me recently that with regards to the Make Games essay, which is the local game dev community website and forum, that you've been hesitant to give feedback recently. Yeah. I don't know if this came out of some negative responses or just an internal question of, am I doing feedback right?
Right. So there were students from a local university who were asking some questions, and I was trying to give as best the advice that I could. And I found that the advice that I was giving wasn't actually very well received. Mm-hmm. And I thought that I was being honest. I thought that I was being helpful. And I had to think a lot about why I was saying the things that I was saying. And some of it, I think, was maybe a form of ego, where it's like, well, I've been where you want to go, so I'm going to tell you how things are done. It's not necessarily wrong, but it does feel like people walk different paths, and the path that I take is not necessarily going to be the same that anyone else is going to take. So it was maybe a feeling of wanting to show people how much I know. So I've been trying to tone way down on that. And I think it's maybe gotten better the more experience I've gotten, because I don't really feel as if I need to validate myself by giving potentially harsh feedback. It's really more now about who I'm giving the feedback to and what they're going to do with it. So it's not about laying down truth bombs or something. It's really about either about motivation. So it could be motivation, it could still be honesty, but it really depends on who I'm talking to and what they're trying to get out of it.
I mean, you've said as well to me that one of the things you're trying to figure out a balance for is how much do you tell what you feel the truth is, and how much do you tell them what you think they need to know?
Right.
And those aren't necessarily the same thing. Like, being hypercritical or saying in the real world, when you try to sell this thing that you've made, this is how it would be received, and like that might not be useful. Definitely not useful to someone just starting out. Yeah. And I think there's this kind of pattern that you see a little bit in creative communities, where the people that are starting the community or some sort of entry level, they're beginning their path. So it's easy to be quite positive about things that are actually quite rough and janky and maybe even just straight bad. Yeah. Then those people become seniors in the community. They've kind of ascended to a higher skill level, and they're now giving different kinds of feedback to each other, which is useful to each other, but not to the people below. And you almost have this suppressing effect, which we've seen. So Make Games essay, this South African forum, in fact, a couple of years ago went through a patch where people were actually complaining. They were actually getting angry that there was really negative feedback coming from seniors in the community. They felt it was destructive. They felt they used the word hostile. And no one was being dishonest, and everyone was trying to help, and it still resulted in that. This is also a lot of kind of the question of tone, which isn't necessarily a thing you consider. Like, is feedback constructive? Like, that's a good question, but now you have to worry about tone.
And I think what I struggle with is, so I'm aware of how destructive some of the things that I've said can be. And so I want to change it, but at the same time, the amount of effort I have to put into editing and proofreading what I'm saying is not insignificant. If it's going to take me over an hour just to write up a really good piece of feedback where I am fairly certain that it will be read in the right way, I'm certain that I've cut out the ambiguities, that I'm not saying anything that might be discouraging. That is a lot of work on my part, a lot of energy spent on something that I'm not really getting very much out of. Like this is ultimately trying to help someone else, but trying so hard to do it in the right way that that I leave myself depleted. And so for a long time, I've given very little feedback on the Make Games forums, and I don't feel good about that. But I'm not really willing to invest as much time into text-based feedback anymore, I think. If I'm talking to someone in person and there's a miscommunication, we can correct it immediately. We can understand from the way that we're speaking, from our tone, from even just having introduced ourselves to each other so that we're not strangers. But online, it feels like such a completely different place. And
you don't even know what some of the lurkers are thinking when they're reading it.
Right, that's a really big other thing too, where it is often people who aren't even in the conversation who are taking things away from it, which is part of why I have to be extra careful about what I say. I feel like earlier on, years ago, I could be honest and I felt like that was fine, but as I gain more experience, it's not even something that I've chosen, but people do look up to us as people who have more experience or who have succeeded in making video games. And so whether I like it or not, whatever I say is being revered or taken as...
Well, I mean, for context, within the South African community, Free Lives right now is arguably the most successful business game studio trying to make games. So we're in a position that we can demoralize people pretty easily if we aren't careful. Yeah. One of the strange things about people is they perform differently based on their confidence. So you see this exhibited in kind of class or wealth dynamics. Right. In studies, people who are taken aside and given a task, and different groups of people perform similarly, but then they're put together, and then there's these upper class people or these higher rank people, and then the lower people perceive themselves to be lower, right. And the people who are lower suddenly perform worse. You see this a bit in a gender divide, like female chess players playing worse against men than they play against themselves. Or if they don't know they're playing against a man, they play differently or they play better. And it's just a confidence thing. It's just a sense of your place compared to other people. And I feel like this can, in a community, which we're always a part of, I mean, feedback is like a community mechanism for improving your work. The people that are sort of the seniors or at the top have this lion's share, this extra advantage of encouragement coming from people that are more positive, essentially, and then the people that are like one step down have this disadvantage in that they see themselves as not as good if they've internalized that. Right. And you find a lot of the people that do the best work are these people that are kind of oblivious to their position. They just walk in and do it regardless, and like, that's great if you have that, but not everyone does, and there's people with real talents that end up in a situation where they're performing worse than their talent should allow them to, right. Because of some perceived like social or experience divide. Yeah. Demoralization and stopping work on a thing could result in them just not practicing, not working, or not working hard, and rather run fast in a direction and realize it's a dead end. Yeah. But you've covered all that ground, you've learned all those things, you were inspired, you were kind of happy. Yeah. And then, to start second-guessing yourself and finding more enjoyment in life in other fields, right. Because you're just not having a good time. And even though you were going to run into a dead end, you would still end up in a better position after you've reached that dead end and come to that conclusion yourself. I mean, I think that's one of the things about that when I was referring to the hostile forum culture, the perceived hostility was a lot of like, oh God, you're doing an MMORPG, like there's no way a team of 4 people can do this from zero experience. Like you simply cannot do it. And that's honest, but not necessarily useful for a kind of an eventual
motivation point of view.
Yeah, and that might be the more important thing.
So I feel like there is a sort of split in terms of the kind of feedback that you want to give someone. If they're doing something largely for fun, then I feel the feedback should largely be about motivation. It should be about encouraging them to continue being creative and fearless and just trying things out. Whereas when they're making projects with the intention of making it a career or something that they really do need to make money out of, then I feel that the honesty is far more important.
Yeah, I mean, if you're letting them spend their life savings on something that's going to be a disaster, that, maybe be honest. Like, maybe some discouragement will help them on balance. I hope this doesn't sound kind of callous, but part of good feedback is receiving feedback. Or at least part of a good feedback exchange is on the receiving end. When I receive feedback, even if it's negative, that you have that emotional response of, I really hate this person now because how could they just, they ignored all the good things or whatever it is. And you can kind of actually be angry. And I do feel that. And then the thing I do is think, well, let's assume everything was said with the best intentions. And then you kind of go, whoa, that's true. We did a Ludum Dare recently, a weekend jam, and we had a game that we really thought was good. And Stephen 2, a Joburg developer, was the second comment there. And he left a sizable piece of feedback. And it opens with, this is really polished, and it kind of ends with, good job. And in the middle, there's this chunk of problems. And it's kind of derivative and not as good as like previous attempts you've made. I think it was, like one of the team members who worked on it kind of came up and was like, oh, Stephen too, I was like, no, this is gold. This is what you want, but you've got to receive it. I'm not trying to say we're bad at receiving feedback or...
I think even the best of us can be bad at it anyway.
Yeah, and it was useful feedback, and that's actually valuable. And that's also a skill, to be able to mentally force yourself to receive the information that feels uncomfortable.
Right, and also to not react in a way that would discourage people from giving you feedback in the future.
Yeah, that makes a huge difference. You always say thank you. God, it hurts, but thank you. And because you have to, because you're trying to get more of that. Even if it hurts, you want more of it. Acting defensively, I mean, your position of kind of being nervous about giving feedback at all, that's a bad result for the community. And to some extent, that's on other people giving you a bad result from hearing your truth bombs, as brutal as they may have been. But, if they were acting perfectly, they'd be like, thank you, that sounds like it sucks, maybe I need to ask you another question, or whatever. But if they're getting angry instead, and I'm saying, I know that feeling, but the result of acting on that is you get less feedback in future. And that's almost the worst possible result. Negative feedback is the opportunity to improve.
Right. As far as Free Lives or Cape Town developers goes, we very much can put into practice face-to-face positivity. But online, you're almost necessarily going to be encountering strangers. The idea of just not giving online feedback anymore doesn't really sound very good to me, because there are people all over South Africa who could really use feedback and who might come to make games looking for it. I don't want to not give that to them either, but then it does require then just putting in the time to getting to know pretty much each person who shows up, I suppose. Person-to-person
communication, relatively easy, but not easy anyway. Feedback online, much harder. Tone is much more of a problem, and it can be discouraging when people don't receive it well. And I find the people who receive the most feedback from me, and I feel most bold to give feedback, are people I've kind of built a rapport with, and that they've received feedback well in the past, even if it was critical. There's that game on the Make Games forums at the moment, Infinite, which is, we both gave them feedback, and it was pretty critical because they'd shared this game really early on, and they've been working for another full year and a half at this point, at least, maybe 2 years. And the game's gotten way better.
Yeah, it's changed so much.
So there's this rapport that's built from giving feedback, having it received positively, seeing improvements. People have set their expectations at the earliest version, and now you're so much further along. They're not introduced it for the first time as this thing that you're barely going to improve on after that point.
Yeah, it'd be terrible if you showed something you were working on and the feedback that you got was something that you couldn't really act on without having to throw away a year of work because you didn't get that feedback in time.
There's this game that launched at Devolver recently, Swords of Ditto, and it launched and received very mixed reviews on Steam. Like it's like at 50% or something, or at least when it launched. It was that, which is incredibly low. Like half the people reviewing it were recommending people don't buy it. And there's a lot to love about the game. You've seen it. Those trailers are amazing. The art is so charming. It looks like there's a lot of content. It looks like really good content. And a lot of the reviews focus on the tutorial section of the game kind of repeats itself. It's a roguelike, but you kind of almost play through a tutorial multiple times. And it's this like painful, slow beginning to the game. Now, that's the kind of thing you could act on.
Right.
It feels like some good feedback at the right time can make a world of difference. Like 3 years of work could have been, capitalized on better or given a better result. Just with a couple people saying, you definitely need to change this one thing.
So it's a slight change in topic, but do you think there's a point in which it's too early to ask for feedback?
No.
Okay.
I mean, maybe before you start is too early. I think so. I was saying recently we did the Ludum Dare, and we made a game we thought was pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool. Stephen too pointed out some problems. It's not perfect. It's a jam game.
So part of it, I think, is that so the problems that he pointed out, I think, were problems that I feel we were largely aware of anyway. And so sometimes I feel as if I'm asking for feedback when I know that there's a large chunk that I'm still grappling with, that I'm largely just going to hear these things that I already know are wrong with it.
This maybe comes down to the person, but for me, I don't think it's too soon to receive that feedback. Even though I know the problem's there, or I'm dimly aware of it, I've been focusing on other problems that I felt were more pressing. You hear the feedback and it's like, oh God, the feedback's there. But then you kind of have this thing, like someone said that thing could be fixed or improved. And if I just improve that one thing, people playing the game will no longer have this negative experience. Right. So I think knowing the problems about the game in a social context can provide social motivation for improving upon them. That's often how I feel. I feel galvanized by negative feedback. It hurts, then I've got this like internalization of a problem in the game, and all I need to do is fix it to feel better. Like, that's great.
I suppose it helps to prioritize and rank the things that I know are wrong anyway.
And people really only ever tell you about the things that they feel the most negative about. So it's like that thing of like, they tell you there's one problem and you're like, okay, I fix it. And then they tell you another problem that existed anyway, but like it wasn't big enough to warrant mention in the original post. And then there's another problem underneath that, and you might work your way down until you get to the point where it's, I can't improve this anything anymore, and it's still not very good. Right. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it is good, and you're just scraping away the things that are hurting the experience. I do feel like there's times where you can keep on removing the problems until you find out there's a fundamental flaw that you can't fix. The only time you don't want feedback is feedback on the idea. Because that has you go like, oh, I have this idea. Can you give me some feedback on the idea? And then you kind of talk it through and you're like, yes, it's a good idea. I've gotten my social reward for coming up with the idea. Now I don't need to develop it.
Right. Also, you might be talking about something but have completely different mental models of what the game actually is.
Yeah, you need something in front of you to start actually criticizing it or understanding it. Because you'd often talk in associations. Like, it's going to be nuclear thrown, but with a bit of a cannonball thrown in. and like Dota, and you're like, those are all good games. Of course it's going to be great, but like, you know, that's not necessarily how it's going to play out. And often an idea is only as good as your ability to execute it. Like, you can have the best idea. You could have had PUBG like 3 years ago, but you couldn't make it, so the idea is not actually, it's not practically good. The giving, you know, that's feedback on an idea. You have to also figure out whether they can even do the thing they're talking about. So, handy tips. Sandwich your criticism. Say something nice and end on something nice, and then say the mean thing in between. People notice this, though.
Yeah.
People are like, you led with something positive, and that was like unnecessarily positive. What's coming next? You know, useful feedback is one thing. Being able to spot a problem early so that people don't waste their time, huge. Also being frank about it. So it's if there's like 4 problems and you go, oh, I'll just tell them about the 2 problems I see, because emotionally I think it's going to be too demoralizing to hear the other 2. Either you are going to be sitting knowing there's this problem and you were silent about it, and it might, if you're right about it, turn out to be such a big problem down the line that it ends up coming up and having to be fixed anyway. People have to trust you. Yeah. They have to trust that you're not being mean. Yeah. They have to internalize that, and you need to definitely be on their side. And you need to earn that.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think you can have that with a complete stranger.
No. And so you probably can't give your most honest feedback with a complete stranger.
Right.
And you can't get to the 4th problem, or whatever it is. You can only tell them the one that looks easy to fix. Right. So maybe other things you can do just to ease it is kind of a meeting halfway. Like, say you're not willing to put in all the work. Go to there's like community meetups that are face-to-face. If you have met someone and they have a rapport and they've kind of said, hey, I'd love feedback from you, or you even offer that kind of thing. And you can say, like, well, I'll give feedback to the people where it costs me the least, with the most guarantee of a result. Yeah. And you can't reach everyone that way, but you can't reach everyone anyway. Right. If it comes at the cost of like our emotional pain or our just time, we end up doing worse work. And like, as much as I want to teach and I enjoy teaching where I can, I'm foremost a creator. Yeah. And that's the most important thing I can do for myself and my team. And it's easy for us just to focus internally and try improve our own practices as best we can. And even getting that right is hard. Even getting a spirit of like open, like constructive criticism and frankness in a studio of 16 people, even that's a challenge. Getting everyone on board, knowing that we all want each other to succeed as best as possible. And some of it's just about doing it often. It gets easier, even if it's hard. Right. Certainly in person, you can start building that rapport quite quickly. Yeah. And avoiding the problems, avoiding confrontation doesn't work. Right. And there is a little bit of structural work that can be done in a place like Freelise, and kind of almost announcing we want to get feedback, and phrasing it as, let's like try solve this problem together, seeing each other do it, like leading by example a little bit. There's things that can be done to kind of signal that this is a safe environment and this is a learning environment, rather than like say a competitive one where people can be threatened by each other's work. Yeah. And also just threatened by negativity, like hearing a problem is tantamount to it being shut down, or your work being, you've lost status or something, which like mustn't be the case. Yeah. One of the things about creative work is that, particularly creative work for entertainment, is there's no way to really test the work, like empirically. You can't compile the code and it turns out to be a good game, or you can't, make an artwork to the exact specifications of the correct image.
Entertainment's already a social thing.
And that's where the only way to test it is to test it on other people. You can have instincts, but those instincts are sculpted by other people's feedback, in fact. And the more feedback you get, the better your instincts become, and the more kind of points of view you can see when doing a work and heading off before you even maybe need to show it. But you always want to show it because you're always honing those instincts. So feedback is absolutely essential then in creative work, particularly creative work for entertainment. That's why we need it, but then it's also this like really complicated thing that's difficult to do and comes with all this potential conflict, or even as bad as demoralizing other people or being demoralized yourself. I think the best thing to do also is to leave a lot of feedback. I actually think that I practice leaving feedback partly as a way to kind of have that rapport for when someone gives me feedback,
Right.
partly as a way to kind of think through problems that they're facing, and to, and there's partly just a pure egalitarian kind of thing. But
There's sort of a quid pro quo thing as well, where if you leave a lot and then you post your next project, it's very likely that you'll receive quite a lot too.
And if they think you like them, they're going to be more harsh.
Right.
And you can't, it sucks, but you want the criticism.
Yeah.
And it can be constructive criticism if you've got that rapport. They've heard you say something nice, they're going to say something nice that's going to help you, and then they're going to say something mean, or not mean, but something true that is mean. And you want that because you have to hear about the negative experiences as well as the good ones in order to figure out what you've made.